Let's look at the second video on complex numbers. In this one we want to look at simplifying square roots with I. And let's look at an example problem. Let's say you want to simplify the square root of minus 120. Now, if you don't use I, the square root of minus 120 is no real solution, no real answer. It doesn't exist. But if you use I, you can get a simpler form. And the rule is that if you have a negative inside the square root, the very first thing that you want to do is to break up the negative term into a minus 1 and a 120. And then the minus 1 becomes an I, and then you simplify 120 just like you would a regular square root. So 20, I think it's 4 and 30. It might be 16. Let's try 16. So you have 120 divided by 16, 7.5. So it doesn't work. So I think 4 and 30 are the smallest, is the best we can do here. So then you have I times square root of 4 times square root of 30. The 4 becomes a 2. So that becomes I times 2 times square root of 30. And now we just have to think about how to write this. The most traditional way of writing this is 2i square root of 30. So we write it so that the square root comes last. And that's your final answer. Now occasionally you'll see it written 2 square root of 30i so that the I comes last, and that's a fine alternative way of doing it. Let's look at another problem. Let's simplify the square root of minus, let's do 280. So the very first thing that we do is we break this into minus 1 and minus 280. And that becomes an I right there. Right? The square root of minus 1 is I. Now 280 is 28 and 10. But 28 and 10 is not going to do any good because they're not perfect squares. So it would be 4 and 70. We can try to do a larger number. Let's do 4 and 70. That's I square root of 4 square root of 70. Square root of 4 is 2, so that's I times 2 times square root of 70. Square root of 70, let's try to simplify that. We can try 4. 4 doesn't work. Let's try 9. 9 doesn't work. 36, no, 36 doesn't work. No, that's it. That's all that we're going to be able to do. So your answer is going to be 2i square root of 70. And that's how we simplify square root with I. Let's do one more example. Let's simplify minus 5 square root of 240. And let's do a second example. Let's simplify 12 square root of minus 700. The reason I want to do these two examples is I want you to see the difference. In this case, it's minus 5 times the square root of 240. Square root of 240 we can simplify. There's no negative there, so there's no need to use I. This is simply going to be 240, I think is going to be 16. Go 240 divided by 16, and it's 16 and 15. So that's going to be minus 5 square root of 16 square root of 15. The 16 is just a 4, so that's minus 5 times 4 square root of 15, or minus 20 square root of 15. If we look at this problem, 12 square root of minus 700, that's a very different problem. Even though they look similar, in this case, it's a real answer, a real number, but it just happens to be negative. In this case, it's not a real number because you have a negative under the square root. The first thing you want to do is break this up into a minus 1 and a minus square root of 700, and this is going to be an I. 12 times I times square root of 700. Now let's see if we can simplify square root of 700. 25 is going to do it, but so is 100. So 100 is going to be easier. square root of 7, and square root of 100. So that's going to be 12I square root of 7 square root of 100. The square root of 100 is 10. So you're going to have 12I times 10 times square root of 7. That's 120I square root of 7. We're done.